This is the Power to Podcast, show 119.
Well, it boils back to the word that Ken said earlier is intentional, intent. You know, everything we do has to have some intent behind it. Otherwise, we're just doing stuff, you know. And if there's not a purpose, and let me tell you this, if that intention is not learning, it doesn't need to be in the classroom. And I'm not just talking about, our relationships about learning. Absolutely. So we have to be intentional in our relationships. We have to be intentional in the tasks we design for students. We have to be intentional with, how we approach them, emotionally.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Kennerman, host of the Power to Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Matt, the Learning Coach Rogers. Matt, what's going on, man?
I'm doing all right. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. Our guest tonight used the word learners a lot instead of students, which is a phrase that you've used for a long time now, and I appreciated it. I always appreciate it when you said it. And in the conversation tonight, I just feel like it adds good context to the conversation and to thinking about what you're doing in the classroom. Why did you always use it?
So it was district adopted, related to our MCL, Mass Customized Learning movement, which goes in line with what we talk about for an hour plus tonight, which is doing the best thing for kids, regardless of how it looks, and being intentional. That'll come up quite a bit. I will mention my praise now, but I think the conversation we've done 100 and I'll say 14 episodes together at this point. I missed a few, but that being said, one of the hard parts about being on this side of the mic is we have to ask questions that get answers that a lot of educators will say, I do it just because, or because I know it's right. And to use a reference of something later in the episode, we as educators give our kids the answers all the time. We look for the process of how they get there so that as educators, we can replicate it in our own classrooms. I'm really proud of how this conversation came out. And I think Jason really clearly identifies what is great preparation to make it happen, great substance, but also matching with modern day students and culture of what we have to consider.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was a great conversation. Jason was a great guest to have on the show. And for a very simple reason. We challenged him and we asked him to cut through the fluff, and he didn't even dive into the fluff. He got right to it. He was practical, he was talking applicable, and he was very specific in his answers. He clearly knows his stuff. He clearly is a seasoned educator, and he has a book out. He's doing some consulting and speaking and becoming an educational influencer, which is fantastic because he knows his stuff. Sometimes you find where there's not a lot of substance to what you're seeing or what you're hearing when you're able to dive deeper with folks that have bulk books and things like that. And so it was really refreshing to talk to him because he gave such practical advice that teachers can use to apply or use to evaluate what they're doing and modify or confirm and reassure what they're doing is creating that learning environment and less of that teaching environment that we talk about so much. So it was an extremely lengthy conversation because it was so rich. So I'm just going to jump right into that conversation now. So let's hear from Teach Better and then bring in Jason Kennedy.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Jason. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
Great. How are you guys?
We are doing fantastic. I am personally super excited for this conversation, as I let you know, as we were sitting here waiting to hit the record button, because a lot of what I have read and seen from you on social media and some of your other content out there aligns directly with things I am very passionate about in encouraging teachers and promoting in education. So I'm personally very excited for this conversation. So let's start things really simple. Please officially introduce yourself to our audience. Let us know where you are coming from and give us a snapshot of what your career in education has looked like.
Gotcha. Well, this will be I'm wrapping up my 22nd year in education, all of it in Georgia, South Georgia particularly. I've been a middle school teacher, a high school teacher, elementary admin, middle school and high school instructional coach. Been every single type of classroom you can think of. I've been in self-contained gifted. I taught gifted and special ed in one classroom for 1 year. Just explored the gamut of everything there is to do with in the classroom, and then even taught college part-time and graded state and national assessments for ETS and Pearson. So glutton for educational punishment, obviously. So just love learning, love this education thing that we do, and love talking with people in order to try to make it better.
Excellent. So kind of a question about your journey through your career as I'm kind of moving into different positions over the last few years. And there's been a couple times where I thought I might make the move, and then I ended up sticking around in fifth grade a little bit longer. So as you made your journey through different levels and different positions, when you maybe stayed in a position longer than anticipated, or you transitioned into a new role, what were some of the instructional takeaways or level ups that you made? You made this huge personal growth in putting together some sort of instructional approach or strategy that came away from being in a particular content or position for a long period of time, or the change and the immediate change almost created that same epiphany as well. Does that make sense?
Sure. Well, anytime you change a role in a school, you get a glimpse of another world almost. It's like you've been involved in your classroom and in your room, and you know what goes on there, and you think, hey, this is what everybody does. And then you step into another role where you're out and about in the building, and you're looking at it and you're going, oh, this is not what everybody does. And you find some great things to tap into, and then you find some things that scare you a little bit. But just I think the biggest part of stepping outside the classroom as a teacher and moving into a different role, I had more opportunities to get poured into professionally with professional development and conferences and leading book studies and doing some other things that I was passionate about. And so I just got more kind of on the job, I guess learning, if you want to call it, for the lack of a better word, of the profession. And then that kind of leads to, once you start diving into things, you start reflecting on your practice, and you start, looking back at it, and you start looking and saying, you know what, we could do a lot better than we're doing. And personally and professionally, in schools, and just after 15 years, I was like, you know what, I thought this job was about teaching this whole time. It's really about learning. And that's it's a big mind shift difference, and it's a big approach difference, but it's not that much more work.
Can you describe that moment in more detail? Was there a single moment, or what really allowed you to come to that realization of it's about learning and it's not about teaching?
I guess after reading so many, so much, well, let's step back. I went to college like most of us, got my degree, secondary English ed major, all content, you know, Shakespeare 1 and 2, World, Lit 1 and 2, all these content classes, and a lot of our teachers do the same thing, but not not one course taught me how to transfer this learning over to people, over to kids. I just went in there and learned my content, and that way I can go into class and I decided, I'm going to do what I think and going to make this interesting, going to make it engaging. I had my teachers, back in the day that I enjoyed, but then I'm like, we're gonna read some different things, we're gonna do some things, and we had a great time, but then 15 years in, I'm like, you know what, after on or about 2000, I don't know, 10, 11, we start getting all this research, and then visible learning research comes along, and it's almost like we've never had anything before that says, here's what works in the classroom and here's how much it works for you. And that's when you start shifting to, okay, now I can be intentional with what I do, because I know that evidence says this particular method, strategy, whatever you want to label it, impact, works at this level. And now I can actually focus on not so much teaching content, but looking for evidence of learning and being intentional about what I want out of eliciting that learning from students, and knowing what to look for, and having them be more of part of the process. Uh, you know, in other words, just making intentional instructional decisions before I ever stepped in the classroom. It's a lot different. You can plan a lesson or you can design a lesson. And I talk with my teachers about those two words. What's the difference between a plan and a design? And we talk about, would you rather have a wedding planner or a wedding designer, a vacation planner or vacation designer? And they all say designer. And I'm like, why? Well, it sounds more fancy. Uh, well, if you think about the word plan, it's usually about, okay, I'm putting these parts in order. But a design is like all these parts working together for a certain outcome. And that's what designing learning means to me, is I want to design whatever I'm providing in the classroom for a certain outcome, and that outcome is learning.
I love that. I gave a keynote address in August to a staff, and one of the phrases I use is stop planning lessons and start planning experiences for your students to dive into learning, to evaluate learning, to observe learning. And I think it just creates a more empowering experience. And I agree, it is much easier when you get your feet wet and when you see it can happen. Do you have any suggestions for teachers that they're drinking the juice, like they get it, they want it, they understand the value of it, but they're unsure of how to either take a single lesson and turn it over into a more student-centered experience, or maybe they're looking at a unit or a project exploration and they're unsure of how much to plan and what to plan to kind of get that ball rolling? Do you have any advice for them to get started with that?
Well, I think you just start with identifying the basic pieces that a well-designed lesson needs. Like, for example, you've got to have a learning target. You got to have an intention for the lesson, and it needs to be communicated in a way where the kids in the room understand what it is. Whatever it is, I can solve a two-step equation. And so if that's my learning target for the day, then that's our goal for this lesson is, by the end of this lesson, we ought to be able to prove to the teacher and to each other that, hey, I can solve a two-step equation. And then the next thing I need to consider as a teacher is, okay, well, what are they going to produce for me in a task that I designed for them that's going to elicit that evidence of learning? And that evidence needs to be able to be seen, felt, touched, everything, by not only just me, but the learners in the room. And they need to be able to look at that. And then my job instructionally is, okay, I've introduced this learning target. Here's what we're doing. We have some kind of opening strategy that kind of activates our prior knowledge. Here's the task coming up, everybody. My job is to give you, and this is what I call in my book, the gist, the guided information, skills, and tools. Guided by me, because we know direct instruction works. We know explicit, instruction works. Guided information. Well, what information do I need? Is there a text? Is there, some kind of facts, statistics, whatever I need? guided information, guided skills, what I'm going to have to model for them, what processes are going to have to be understand how to do, and tools. Tools are okay. Well, what where can I go as a student when I get stuck? What happens when I get tripped up? Where can I go besides raising my hand? Hey, Mr. K. And the other set of tools is pathways to accelerate. Okay, if I got this and I can run with it, how can I take it to the next level? So once I've given you the guided information, skills, and tools, and I provided a success criteria, which is the most important tool in my opinion, kids need to know what success looks like on the tasks that we're giving them, because that way, if I turn you guys loose with a task and you know what success looks like, I'd say 50% of the room are going to be off and running. 25% of them are going to already be running past that, ready to accelerate. My 25% possibly, that's my small group that I would say, hey guys, let's come up here and just regroup for a second and let's talk about where we are, where we need to go. And success criteria also gives you that opportunity for feedback, because if I have a goal and I've shown you what success looks like, you can tell me, okay, well, I'm here and I need to go here, Mr. K, what feedback can you provide me? And I can say, well, you said you're here, here's where you want to go. Let's talk about how I can help you get there. And so, just taking some basic parts, and part of my book is, basic kind of framework that accounts for all these pieces that we know that has, some really high effect sizes, and putting them into practice in your tier one every day. And that's the key, because all these, effect sizes, hey, jigsaw, 2 years worth of growth. Well, if I do one jigsaw, that's not going to cut it. I need to practice all this with frequency, intensity, and duration, and making, some basic frameworks part of our daily practice and design, and making that design, push that learning and give it to who it belongs in the first place, the learners. That's what it's about.
And Ken, feel free to chime in on this as well, but I so appreciate how eloquently you just spelled that out. Just because I was thinking about this, and we have new teachers listening to this show. We have seasoned pros listening to the show. And what I can remember is when we enter a classroom, especially recently, we've been told engagement is really the key. Do things that build relationships, and engagement is such an emphasis. And I found myself as a new teacher struggling with the core content and material that I needed to cover. And I felt like I shifted and went really heavy in instruction for a time period before kind of finding that balance. But I appreciate what you clearly defined as here are the must-haves when designing, because I think even using that word design has a beautiful way of integrating together both engagement and appeal and relationship with high expectations of learning. So can you just speak to, maybe extend on this a little bit further, of someone that you're working with, whether it's in the admin position or a colleague that goes the route that so many of us are starting in our educational journey, which is friends of students, transitioning to a true educator that imparts valuable instruction to kids?
Gotcha. Well, everything we do in education is centered in relationships, and so we have to make those positive student relationships a priority. And that's one of those things where I've always felt comfortable. I can connect with kids all day long, and it's not a issue for me. But there's some, I've had high school teachers say, well, I'm not here to have relationships with them. I'm just here to teach content. And I'm like, well, that's sad. I would not want to come to work and just do this. Just replace me with YouTube tomorrow. Because if I'm all here for content, and not to interact and have relationships with these kids, then what am I here for? But, the other part of that is there's so much learning potential that you lose by not forming those positive relationships. Not only does student-teacher relationships have a, almost 2 year worth effect size, that also bleeds into teacher credibility, which that has over a year's worth of effect size. Teacher credibility is, do I as a learner feel that you have my best interest at heart? Do you care about my learning? Are you going to be able to, do what it takes? Do you care enough about me to do what it takes to make my learning happen? And so you've got a whole lot of other issues that come into play with that student-teacher relationship. And you were talking about engagement. The beautiful thing about engagement is it can be designed as well. We know that there's a book, 17,000 Classroom Visits Can't Be Wrong by Antonelli and Garver. And they noticed that there were some certain qualities about tasks that students were asked to complete in class. And they discovered that, hey, there's these eight qualities that we find in all these engaging tasks. And the beautiful thing about these 8 qualities is they said their evidence shows that you only needed 3 out of the 8 to have 87% sustained engagement in your classroom. And it's things like, well, one of them is safety. And that goes right to the student relationship. Do I feel safe with you? Can I take a risk in this room? Do I trust you? So if you got the student relationship piece down, you got 1 out of your 3 already done. And I just mentioned, success criteria. Well, clarity is another one of those qualities. And you can't have clarity unless you have a goal and a success criteria tied to it. So then you've already got 2 of the 3 you need. The rest, the beautiful thing about ELA, I could come up with all 8 in any kind of task I wanted to. Now, math is a little different, and science might be a little different, but, there's sense of audience, novelty, and the other qualities that a lot of teachers confuse engagement with entertainment, and that's not it. I'm not up there to do a dance and a show. I'm here to get you to, it's eliciting an urge to be involved. And that's what engagement is. And that's, it's that Goldilocks principle that Hattie talks about. Not too easy, not too hard, but just right to be challenging enough to where I want to see if I can figure this out. And, if I had anything to say to any teachers as far as engagement, look at the task you're asking students to complete. And first of all, is it going to show you evidence of learning? Is it going to show them evidence of learning? And then secondly is, is it going to be engaging? Now, don't confuse engagement with entertainment, because then we go to a whole other issue of, okay, it's fun and entertainment, but it's all fluff. And I don't want the fun to overtake the function. It's fun and engaging. Yeah, everybody's involved. But if I ask them, hey, well, what are you learning? What are you learning with this? I don't know. I went to I was on an advanced ed accreditation team, got sent to another county in the state. And I was at a middle school, and they were putting beads on pipe cleaners to represent DNA sequences. And all the kids were involved, but every single one of them I asked, hey, what are you doing? I'm just putting these things on this pipe cleaner. Literally, that was it. And that was at a middle school. But then, I went to this same school system, went to an elementary school, and, go around asking the kids, hey, what are you doing? Well, I'm doing, we talked about the standard, and we have a learning target up there. Awesome. So what are you working on? Well, I'm working on this. Oh, what do you do when you get stuck? Well, Miss Smith told me if I get stuck, I need to go over here and do this. Well, what happens when you think you got it? Well, she said, when we think we got it, we go over here. Now, this was a group of like 3 over here. There were 6 groups going on in the room. Miss Smith was over with 3 or 4 over here. But everyone else, they knew what to do. There was a success criteria. They knew where to go when they needed assistance, and not assistance with another adult, assistance on their own. And this was 1st through 5th grade. Every single classroom I went into that school was that way. And I'm like, when I was an instructional coach in middle school and high school, I always tried to get field trips to go to the elementary and primary schools, because, really a lot of them have it down. When we get into middle school and high school, we all start thinking, well, we got to get them ready for college. This is what they're going to experience, and they're just here to learn content, and I'm here to teach it. and we're missing out on so much learning potential by not, focusing on, actual learning from students instead of delivering
A phrase I
content.
hear a lot in middle schools and high school is, "This is really important. It's worth 50 points." And from my perspective, that kills the culture of learning in a classroom. On the flip side, I understand that students have been really trained to value things that are worth points. My students, if I don't assign points, they're just not going to do it. And so there's that double-edged sword where I truly believe if you create a culture of learning in your classroom, you will work past that. And as a secondary teacher, especially maybe even a high school teacher, after they've experienced those types of classrooms in middle school for years and years, breaking that is hard. Can you speak at all to how you created a culture of, because I already know you did just from our conversation here, how you created a culture in your classroom where students valued learning beyond just earning points, and any advice you have for teachers to to get to that point, even if right now the reality is their students won't do the work unless there's points associated?
All right. It's funny that you said that because today I read an article about uh, some colleges are considering doing away with freshman grades. No grades for freshmen. Just, just so hope maybe this college thing will turn it around. That way, the high school can turn around and we can just trickle all down to middle school. Because a lot of our primary and elementary have standards-based grading anyway. No numerical grades. But we all get that question: is this for a grade? You know, um, I would say the after you get your staff and your teachers on board with, hey, this is what we believe works, this is what we commit to put into action, and this is how we know that it's working because we can see evidence. Once you get that collective efficacy with your adults in the building, what you need to work on is getting your kids involved, and we should be talking the language of learning with kids just as much as we do with the adults. I mean, a kid ought to know what an activating strategy is for and what prior knowledge does. They ought to know, what their role in learning is. They ought to be able to know what a success criteria is. They ought to be able to talk the talk just like we do. I don't know why we keep it a secret. You know, we need to use this type of language with them, and then they can discover, their purpose, and and building that learning potential in there, and them being able to talk the talk and walk the walk in the classroom is how you get them on board. A lot of our teaching has been transactional. You do this, you earn this, and grades aren't earned. The minute we say grades are earned, we make it a transaction, and it's about the work, and it's not necessarily about the learning. So, and how it is in middle school and high school sometimes. Oh, well, here's a notebook check, or hey, you brought back a paper that's signed. Here's 5 points. You know, I kind of liken that to when I was a kid, you had your thermometer and you wanted to stay home from school. Your mom gave you the thermometer, and oh, mom, I need some water. When she walks out of the room, I take that thermometer out, put on the light bulb, and and I get it where I want it. Sometimes it's over, so I shake it. But anyway, that is not true measurement of my temperature. Same with our grade book. Anything that goes in the grade book should be about learning. Anything that doesn't apply to learning should not be in the grade book. Otherwise, you just inflated it, and it's not about learning anymore. So grades are they're until college changes, and that can trickle back down, because we got GPA and all sorts of other stuff going on with it. We're going to be stuck with grades, but we got to make them mean something. And grades, if anything, should be feedback for the adults more than the kids in the first place. If I look at a grade or grades, it should be, a measurement of how well I design learning for that individual student or for the group as a whole, and say, okay, how can I improve this next time?
I can definitely relate to that because I often think in parent teacher conferences that is a great checkup, not for your kid, but is what I'm creating in the classroom meeting their learning needs? Are they seeing successes that they should be seeing based off the instruction that they are being provided? Or what are the reasons why there are hiccups? And it's a great time to pause and say, whether it's in the fall or even in the spring, I know this about your child. Can you give me any insight so that we can continue to design instruction that is purposeful, that allows kids to see success? Because we all want success, and we're not going to have all A students. But I saw a tweet recently that just said, is a grade that was determined using 2 items in a grade book any more or less powerful or accurate than something that has 40 entries that address that score? And I have a conversation with my coworker very frequently. How often do we get to the point where we take the grade book to the report card and we use our teacher discretion to adjust a grade? Because especially at elementary, and I know that in the middle and high school that they're more cognizant of what's going on in their grade book, but if they're putting in that effort, yeah, you're going to inflate it. If you feel like there are some tough entries that really brought their score down, you might inflate it, because realistically, as you're mentioning, I'm not going to say that grades don't matter, but if you're using grades solely to identify if a student is successful member of your classroom, then you're using grades as an instructor incorrectly. Ken, go ahead.
Well, just like just like if a kid made an 82 on whatever you gave him, what does that mean? What did he learn anything? If he made 100 on something, did he learn anything? Some would argue, say no, he already knew it, because a lot of research says that kids already know 40 to 60% of what we're teaching them in the first place. And so if a kid made 100 on it out of the gate, well, obviously he already knew it. I didn't need to go over. We didn't need to take care of it in the first place. And you talked about parent teacher conferences. One of my favorite things is student-led conferences. We do them twice a year. We do one in the fall, one in the spring, and kids talk. Another way to get your kids on the learning train is getting them to talk about their test scores and make goals for the year, and talk with that trusted adult from home and say, hey, here's my goals for the year. Here's what I want to accomplish. Here's how you can help me at home. And a lot of our our student-led conferences, we talk about the academic stuff, but then I also say, okay, what's something personal you want to, learn how to, for this year? Some kids, I want to learn how to play the guitar, or I want to shoot, a 3-point shot in a game, whatever it is. But it's all about that, getting them to take ownership of the learning, because it's theirs after all in the first place.
Can I just get either of your opinions? Because Jason, of what I've learned, you are one that recognizes necessary evils inside education, and I know Ken does too. But we're recording this right before testing season, and luckily you will be listening to this podcast after testing season, when we are hopefully coasting for summer. But I think one of the things that I struggle with is integrity as a teacher of the conversation that I have, or the emphasis that I put on certain things in my classroom, i.e., I want my kids to do well on the assessment, because realistically it gives me the permission to keep on making a really good school experience without someone managing every lesson. Not that I'm fearful that if someone were to be integrated into my classroom, but I worry that the freedoms to use teacher discretion might be adjusted a little bit. But the point that I'm making is, just like we think designing high quality instruction is the direction we need to go as educators, how do we also convey a message that standardized testing is not loved, a necessary evil like grades, but still an emphasis that please do your best, because it really allows us to continue to do what we feel like is best for kids?
I mean, whenever I approach a test with my kids and with the adults, that are stressed out about them, I'm like, look, guys, it's one test on one day. With the kids, it's like, hey, it's one test on one day, and it says something about the learning you experienced this year. Just do your best. You know, we've created so much test anxiety in kids and in adults, and there's no telling, you know, what kind of accurate measurement you have in the first place. Uh, there's arguments that no reading comprehension test is even valid in the first place because it's all about background knowledge, and we have kids coming with all sorts of background knowledge. So it's just one of those things where you just got to do. It's like going to the dentist. You just got to do it twice a year and you get it over with. And as far as grades go, I've found that parents are far more passionate about grades than kids are. Whether they're on the high end or the low end. Parents get fired up about grades really quickly, and again, you know, uh, if you have that conversation and you have this philosophy about grades and you make that clear to everyone, parents, your learners in your room, say, look, you know, grades are a reflection of what we're doing in the classroom, and it helps me make decisions about what I bring to you, and you should be looking at your grades too and say, it should be a reflection on that you take and say, you know what, I made an 82 on this test, or I made an 82 on this assignment. If I want to do better, what do I need to reflect on? What do I need to change? What do I is there something I can do next time? So it's all about, I'm reflecting as an instructor, but I also want my students to do the same thing, reflecting as a learner. And so, you just make it a part of the whole process. One thing I did as a teacher in the classroom is, instead of rules, I had expectations, and the students, the learners created them. What do you guys expect out of each other in here while we're together, so you can learn, explore, reflect? What are some things you need out of each other? And then the other list was, what do you need out of me? And those were put up on the wall, and that way we all worked collaboratively to create them, and that way we all could call each other out. Students could call me out, say, hey, Mr. K, this is what we agreed, that you agreed to this and meet our expectations, and you're dropping the ball a little bit. All right, hey, I admit it, guys. Let's step back and see what we can do. Same with students; they'd call each other out. Hey, we agreed to this. So it's all about building that community and in your learners.
I want to add to that to answer your original question, Matt, and then you can jump in. I believe that grades are a reflection that we should already anticipate. I would tell my students, when it came to tests in our classroom, I'm not going to be surprised. I shouldn't be surprised by the score you see at the end of a unit, and neither should you. And my job is to do everything I possibly can to prepare you for this end of unit assessment. And you need to do everything that you can do. So you need to bring the effort and the focus and the energy when I am bringing the learning experiences to you. And I think in order for those to be as valuable as possible outside of going into the grade book, to be a learning experience for students, is to put intentionality into that. And the understanding that there's a high probability that the career you choose will not require test taking. You will stop taking tests when you stop pursuing education. However, the reality is whatever career you choose, there will be requirements of things you have to do that you may or may not enjoy, that you may or may not naturally excel at. And so some of you may not naturally excel at taking tests, and you might have to work a little bit harder, but you do naturally excel at using your hands. And you're going to be in an environment in the future where it's easy for you and not easy for others. And so getting students to kind of have that mindset. And also, I was very intentional with them creating a study plan for any assessment that we did, and then reflecting on, did they do that study plan or not? And then when they got the test back, did the plan, the process, and the result all line up? If they are planning the study and they are studying and they're scoring poorly, that's either my fault Or let's look at the studying they are doing. Maybe they are trying really hard, but what they're doing to prepare is not effective because they're not getting help from home or they're not using the right resources to prepare. For the state standardized testing, I just kept it as don't make this a bigger deal than it is. Yes, you're going to be tired by the end of the week, but I also think that we make kids more tired because we make such a big deal like, "Oh my god, we have to test for 4 days in a row." Yeah, it is exhausting, but it's not that exhausting. So I would almost just say that to the kids like, just do your best. You're going to have like 3 hours of extra recess today. So I think you'll be okay. Um, yeah,
There'll be a
exactly.
trade-off.
And just listen, what we do works. Prove it. Prove it to yourself, prove it to the state, prove it to the school board, prove it to the principal. Just do your best. If you're confused, skip it, take a guess, move on. Don't stress about it. So I think that testing anxiety is there. And I think it comes from parents. I think it comes from the students. I think it comes from the teachers being anxious about it as well. Teachers having unnecessary angst about their scores compared to their colleagues when we could just focus on those learning experiences more importantly.
And to add, I mean, I love your idea about the study plans, but on the back end, I would also, suggest to my teachers, have students conduct an error analysis. You know, here are the questions that I found really easy that I missed. Here are the questions that were difficult that I missed. Here are the questions that were easy and I got right. I mean, just looking at every single, result and finding the causality of it, you know. And sometimes students find, oh man, I made this stupid error. I should have done this instead of that. Or, you know what, I really completely was lost in this concept. And that way gives them a little bit of a picture to focus on moving forward. And it gives me a little bit more, substance for some
Yeah,
future
it
feedback
does, and it
as well.
allows you to realize when students, and it allows the students to realize that a lot of times, sometimes it's reading that's preventing them from performing well on science and math specifically. They're using all the right formulas and different things, but they're applying it to the wrong problem, or they're missing a piece of what they're looking at. I really like that error analysis.
Well, and then another thing I would do is, just a little formative check. Let's say it's 4 questions. I would ask students, give me 2 wrong answers and tell me why they're wrong, and then just write the right answer. I don't care why you think the right answer is right. I don't want to know. I just want you to know why 2 are wrong, because if you know why something is wrong, I know you know it. I could close my eyes and pick a right answer and and be correct. But if I can tell you why something is wrong, I know you know it. And so a little 4 question, you know, give me 2 wrong answers and why they're wrong. Give me the right one, and that made a big difference. It forced them to actually think through things.
Can I bring up something, and I'd love your opinion? Just hearing really good teaching strategies. I love what you just said. Come up with wrong answers and identify why they're wrong. I think that's a really productive and powerful consideration. One of the things that I've always struggled with, at least at the elementary level, error analysis, is when trying to drill down to why a student might have got an answer wrong, or even why a student got an answer right, that we educators, again, especially in the lower range, will do everything in our power to guide kids to success. And so you may tee up an error analysis for a 10-year-old, and they might tell you, I got the answer right or wrong because I just guessed. And that is so disheartening. Or you had the benefit of having an adult come in who's a title tutor or para that provides a tremendous amount of support that they should get the answer right by all of the differentiation that they reached. I guess tied to the conversation we're having, how do you find yourself judging if a student really gets a concept further? I really like your wrong answers, but what are other ways that you feel like you're taking formative information, knowing that you can use it for instruction, recognizing that so much of it could have been they looked off of their partner's paper, they took a random guess, they got a ton of assistance, it was their lucky day, whatever the case may be? What are some other strategies that really guide your one-on-one instruction small group instruction that you feel like are reliable uses of that tier 2 or tier 3 time?
I think you can do a tremendous amount of growth and feedback with, really detailed success criteria. And I've seen it work in, there's a video that Corn puts out with their stuff, and it's a kindergartner, and there's this writing continuum on the wall, and it was, I think the original, it was just clipped out of a workbook, but it was basically on a scale of 1 to 10. It's all on a bulletin board, and they asked this little girl, uh, you know, explain what this is. And she goes to, like, I think the second number, and it's basically a really rough drawing of a cat, and it's got some letters out beside it. Like, I have a I have a kitty and it's funny, is what the sentence is supposed to say. And she says, well, I know I'm not at this level, because at this level they try to make the letters straight, they try to do this and try to do that, and so that's where they are. And she's like, well, where are you? And she's like, well, I'm at a 9 step, because I made my letters straight. I spaced out my words. I, tried to spell them correctly. Da, da, da. And she's like, and I want to go to a 10, because at a 10 I can do this, this, and this. And so it's all about making their evidence of learning and their success criteria as tangible as possible. They can look at something and say, you know what, this is what mine looks like. This is what, a quality example looks like. How are they alike? And then how are they different? And then how can I make mine look more like this one? And it's easier to do with language, a little bit trickier with math. But I think the more we talk about with these kids about what learning is and what a success criteria is and what it's for and how we use it to, not only see where we are, but see where we want to go. That way we can talk about how we get you there. But really making it as tangible as possible, just so they can see it, because that's what visible learning is about, making the learning visible, not just to me, but everybody in the room.
I'll take it a couple different ways, and I'll try to hit the math and the science a little bit more, because I love that answer for writing and allowing them to compare and see those criteria. One thing similar to the error analysis, a opposite strategy I do is when you're teaching a skill or they're working on a skill, give them the answer, give them the right answer, and just say, show me how to get there. Right. So now they're not stressing about trying to find the right answer. They're trying to determine the path to that answer. But with math and science, I think the piece that's missing a lot to really see if students understand the content is getting to the application piece, is going beyond the worksheet where the title tells the students exactly what they have to do to solve every problem, right? The age old, this is the addition and subtraction word problem worksheet. Well, it's not. It's just an addition and subtraction worksheet, because the words don't matter anymore, because they already know it's one of those two processes. But creating creating an experience where students have to apply skills that they've learned, and they don't necessarily have to do all of them or use them in the same way. So an activity I used to use in my room that was very simple to assess their ability of measurement, of area, of perimeter, and volume, all skills that I taught, is I would just say, tell me how much water I need to fill this classroom from floor to ceiling. We close the walls, we seal the doors, we seal the windows. How much water to fill this room? And I would span it over a couple days, maybe a week. It would be an independent piece of work that they could get to outside of small group instruction. But it forced them to use measurement. It forced them to find the area, find the volume, do some research. How much does a cubic foot or a cubic yard convert to in gallons? Because I wouldn't even say how many gallons. I would just ask how much water, right? So now they're thinking about what types of measurement are there? How do you convert measurements? So they're being forced to apply those and being forced to showcase their understanding. And I'm assessing it not only, the answer is probably the least important part of the entire activity. It's how much intervention did they need? What did their work look like? Did they know to convert at all? Do they understand the purpose of converting? Or How did I have to scaffold? How did I have to intervene? So creating those opportunities where you can see their thinking in action, I think is so important for them to do. And there's so many ways to create those opportunities. I think if we step back and we just do our best to set them up for students. But it can be as simple as that. That's one simple question that I posed. I didn't create the work. I didn't create the worksheets. I literally just gave them the question and just said, figure it out. There weren't note sheets. There weren't anything attached to that, but just giving them that space. So there's a lot of formative assessment built into that. And it's the same in science. If they've learned skills to identify how to solve a problem or to analyze a situation or to determine or predict a result, let them do that and then see what happens. Even if they're wrong, even if they're way off, it's the process that's the key piece there.
Well, and that's how you learn when you're off. And I heard you say, basically the three magic words to any kind of learning and understanding. It's procedural knowledge, conceptual knowledge, and application knowledge. And especially in math, where we just we drill a lot of procedural knowledge, and then sometimes we lost the concept, the conceptual knowledge. And so when I ask a kid to convert, a fraction, you know, 3 1/4, and make it an improper fraction, and I'll say, well, you just multiply the 4 times 3, add the 1, add 13/4, and they think you're a wizard because you've just done some kind of magic trick, because they have no idea what the concept behind that procedure works. We teach a lot of shortcuts in math, but then we don't. That's why I love Howie on TikTok and Twitter. If you've ever seen his math videos, they're amazing because he takes lots of math concepts and shows you the concept behind it. And so one of the, like your activity there, start with the application, applying it, to your room full of water, and see how much concepts they know behind it. What conceptual knowledge do I need to figure this out, and what are the steps involved, that
And
procedure.
don't feel like activities like that need to be summative. And Matt, we've had many conversations on the
No.
formative versus summative, mid unit versus end unit. Serve it up when you haven't necessarily explicitly taught that. One, like you said, Jason, they're coming in with, they already have the knowledge. They don't need to learn it from you. You assess them to figure out who knows the vocabulary, who doesn't. But when you pose that question, they're gonna be curious. They're gonna start figuring out, and maybe they get to maybe you have a group that gets to a point where they're like, okay, the volume of this room is blank cubic feet. Great. And then they're gonna say, well, how much water is that? I wonder how you figure out how much water that is when you only have measurements in feet. Do you measure water in feet? Right? You serve up those questions, and now they're thinking more, and then they say, well, if they can say, how do you convert feet to water? That's a great question to ask Google. See what it gives you. If you don't understand that, let me know, and I can help you. Interpret what you're learning, and I don't expect you to. If I've done similar things where they're trying to determine the volume of spheres with marbles. I don't expect them to be able to understand the formula for finding the volume of a sphere, but I expect them to get to that question, to find it, and then say, Mr. Ehrman, can you help me with this? Because I have no idea what this means. Sure, I'd be happy to help you with that.
Right. And going back to, what you just said, you can collect all the data you need without any numbers in that process that you're saying with those kids. And because, some would argue that the minute you put a number in the grade book, you're no longer formative. You're summative all day long. The minute a grade goes in the grade book, you're summative. But all that formative learning that you just described with those activities, all I need to do is walk around, and jot down some notes and notice that, Timmy's got this and Johnny doesn't. And, goes back to those teacher reported grades that you just talked about. Teacher reported grades and students, self reported grades are two of the top 3 effect sizes. And those teacher reported grades it's because I know my students so well, and because I look at their formative, I know their data inside and out. I can know within 10 points of what they're going to make on this next test. And it's not about, me being, a psychic or anything. It's just, I know these kids so well, and I know what they're capable of, and I know what learning, looks like for them, that I know that before they ever
But
take
I
the
guess
test.
part of the challenge is those are dangerous words to say some way. Like, considering you have an admin that is new, or they're really clinical, or you have a coworker that's looking for what is that special sauce exactly, and you're leading with terms like I know my kids really well. The hard part is you have spelled what knowing your kids looks like in a gazillion different ways and what you're critically looking for, but that is something that you have developed a keen eye for from creating experiences in class where that's what you're depending on. When you're told you have to put grades in the grade book, okay, all right, I'll start really addressing that now. But I think often it's found people that are really good at certain things are really bad at explaining why they're good at it. And a lot of the reasons they're good at it is because it comes natural to them and they don't see it any other way. What I love about this podcast is a lot of times we talk about trying to talk to people who are really good at things and uncover what makes it really good. And I appreciate, Jason, you've really, like, I know I will be listening back to this to listen to some of the straightforward, very like, there are so many clips that are just direct of what we need to hear as educators trying to make our time purposeful. And too often we find ourselves getting frustrated or tired or not worth explaining. I not that you need to be complimented, but I just appreciate the work that you're doing in education as well. To say, simply put, you led this conversation with, here's a tremendous amount of high quality, instructionally valid, purpose based design to a lesson, and then how do we carry that out through the backward mapping. And I appreciate what you have said, and Ken, I know that we have the privilege of talking to a lot of teachers. I just wanted to point out that I felt like you have vocalized it better than some educators I've ever talked to.
Well, it boils back to the word that Ken said earlier, is intentional, intent. You know, everything we do has to have some intent behind it. Otherwise, we're just doing stuff. You know, and if there's not a purpose, and let me tell you this, if that intention is not learning, it doesn't need to be in the classroom. And I'm not just talking about, our relationships about learning. Absolutely. So we have to be intentional in our relationships. We have to be intentional in the tasks we design for students. We have to be intentional with, how we approach them, emotionally. We have to be, all sorts of things that we have to be intentional about. And intention, you know, is about design. Before I've commented recently is, who shows up to our room has so much more to deal with us than we realize. Now, do we want students to show up to our rooms, or do we want learners to show up to our rooms? Because I can have students show up to my room and they sit quietly and they raise their hand and they do their worksheet and they turn it in and they receive their grade afterward, and we go and we do it the next day. And I can have students, or I can have learners who, you know, explore and self-assess and reflect and revise and collaborate and do all the things that is embodied in learning. Which the irony of that is, a lot of our student, teaching classes, we're here to, we're here to, it's quoting some secondary teachers, well, we're getting ready for the real world. Well, I know of no job where I can go sit somewhere and do a worksheet for 8 hours and then, clock out. But there's thousands of companies who want students who are employees who can critically think and communicate and collaborate and problem solve and all the other things that we need to design into our learning rather than compliance and content. And so that's the big message that I try to talk about is, my website's called Let's Quit Teaching. And that's what it's about. It's not, the job's never been about teaching. It's always been about learning. And that's the biggest mind shift that we have to make is, and learning requires intention.
And I think, sorry, Matt, I want to jump in with this and then I'll come back to you. Kids have been asking the right question for decades that I think teachers have been ignoring too long. When am I going to use this in the real world? We ignore it because we're afraid of it, but the reality is we should be answering it. And if we can't give a real reason, then we should really be evaluating. Now, I know there are state standards, but if you truly look at the state standards, there's probably less than you realize. You're probably teaching a little bit more than you think you need to. But also do some homework. If you're an elementary teacher, it might be a little bit harder for you to know the real world application. And I say that only because we're not viewed as content experts. We're jack of all trades. We have a lot of content that we have to teach versus a secondary teacher. They have that specified content, but challenge yourself to think about, well, when am I going to use this in the real world? Or where do I, not necessarily even when do I need to use this, but when will I observe this? Or when is this happening around me? I was driving with my son tonight, and yesterday he was digging in my yard, and he was digging the biggest hole he could possibly dig. And he said, when am I gonna get to the bottom of this hole? I said, well, there is no bottom of the hole. You could technically dig right through the center of the earth. Now, I didn't go through the layers of earth with him, but he said, what do you mean? And I explained, he's seen like a globe before, and we talked about that. Conversation ended. 24 hours later, I'm driving with him in the car, and he says, Daddy, is it dark? Is it nighttime on the other side of the earth right now? And the sun was setting. So I started to explain to him about when the sun is setting, the sun is rising, all those concepts. That ties to so many content skills that some grade level somewhere teaches. It made me start to think, as teachers, if we want the students to see where this applies, they might not know the right questions to ask. They might not know the right things to be curious about in relation to what we're teaching. My son was clearly very curious about this, and I can't wait to talk to him more about it. But why not pose the questions related to what we're teaching and see where their curiosity is piqued and where they want to learn more? And that's where you can allow the application to happen and that exploration to happen. Sorry, Matt.
So I guess this is, again, coming at both of you guys. The light bulb went off at a certain point that it is about learning, not teaching, that it is about experiences, not being the one who does the most speaking. In a world where we deal with state standards and really heavily, I say this almost every episode, but like an educator that's dealing with a scripted curriculum. One of the things that I listen to, I mean, Ken and Jason are of the same breed, it surely seems, and I wish that I could drink that potion. I feel like I'm on the outside a little bit of knowing how to go about bringing those elements into my classroom because I'm not confident yet. And I'm sure that there's many educators that can listen to you and say, yeah, I totally get where you're coming from. Those are experiences I want my kids to have too. But I feel so tied to my curriculum that I don't know how to start. And without breaking any rules, what was the guidance? And Ken, you're going to give me a lame answer like it's just how it's how I view things and it's my personality. But what is that light bulb or that trigger, that switch that allowed you to recognize, no, I'm doing what's good for kids, and this is the series of resources or the mindset that I have that means that I can start with a lesson that is built around an activity or a challenge or something that breaks the traditional we'll say, Houghton Mifflin style lesson?
Well, I can remember. I'll go back to my student teaching. I was fortunate to have a mentor teacher that I was assigned to, who, okay, day one, she did her thing, and then at the end of that day, she said, "Okay, what are you doing tomorrow?" And typically, that process is, a couple weeks. I teach one class a day, and then no, it was day two. What are you doing tomorrow? And so I'm like, well, gulp, here we go. And I can distinctly remember this one time that we were co-teaching with another English teacher across the hallway. This was a high school, and we're reading a book by Walter Dean Myers called Gathering of All Men. If you've ever read it, it's every single chapter is told by a different character. And so my mentor teacher said, "Hey, the teacher across the hall who we're co-teaching with, doing this thing with, she's giving a sheet of paper with all the characters and everything, spelled out for her students." She's like, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want them to figure it out on their own. Let's hang blank sheets of paper all over the walls, and as we're going through this thing, let's just start collecting information, you know." And that's, you're talking about taking risk and how does a teacher, step out of that bounds. Well, we have to remind ourselves we're in a profession, just like doctors and lawyers. And what do doctors and lawyers do? They practice, and that's what this whole thing is. You will fail. You will, we've all done it. We've done it over and over and over again. But through our failures is how we learn, and how we learn what works and what doesn't work. And so, I was handed, my last stint teaching high school before I moved into different roles, I was handed 4 8-inch binders and said, "Here's what we do." And, I'm like, okay. And I shut my door and I threw those in the trash can. It's like, no, this is not what we do, you know. So, the beautiful thing about curriculum is we have a curriculum. It's our state standards. That's what we teach. How we teach, that's a different story. And how we teach is the state standards, what we teach, combined with who we teach. And we have the who and we have the what. We put those together. Now we have the how. Because that curriculum company who sold you that scripted curriculum, they will never be as good as you are, Matt, because you know your kids and they don't know who your kids are or anything about them. And so if I had anything to say to teachers is you will always be better than any scripted program that's given to you, because you know your kids and you know their needs and you know their strengths and you know the opportunities they have to grow. That company does not. So use that curriculum as a resource, but you do what's best for the learning for the kids in your room.
So I'll do my best to not give you a lame answer here, Matt.
Best of luck, buddy.
So I've been a part of classes and subjects and in my district where we have those purchased programs, which are then adopted as the curriculum, even though it shouldn't be. It's just a program that supports the curriculum. But I've been a part of that. And I also now am on the other side as an instructional coach, watching programs roll out in different grade levels and different subject areas. And I came from the camp of, I'm not doing what this program tells me to do. I'm going to, like you said, Jason, teach how I believe will best benefit who is sitting in front of me. And so I was very, very anti-program. I wasn't against using it completely. I was against following the script completely. I was very anti-script. And now, like I said, being on the other side, I understand the reasoning behind the word fidelity and why supervisors and curriculum supervisors are requesting that fidelity of teachers of please do what the program tells you to do, because it's not that they believe that's best, but they want the teachers to realize what is good about the way the program is written and why that program was adopted. And so for teachers that are teaching a program outside of their first year, so it's year 2 or year 3 or year 5 of having this scripted program, I would encourage you to challenge the administrators. Why did we purchase this program? What was it about this program? Because they all have something different. For example, we've used everyday math for a long, long time in our district, and I think it's a great program. I think it's incredibly strong. It has great resources. It does have great strategies for teaching students. But one of the key components of everyday math is it spirals. It spirals K to 6. So not only are you spiraling through concepts, and what I mean by that is you're revisiting concepts multiple times in 1 year, but that spiral layers across multiple grade levels. When I had that understanding and I was told this is one of the main reasons we use everyday math, I told myself, great, I'm going to follow unit by unit what they want me to teach. So I am following that spiral, but I'm not going to sit here and deliver this scripted whole group lesson to my entire class at the same time, because that's not going to benefit who's sitting in front of me. I'll deliver this, what is in this script, to a set of my students because they're the typical fifth grade student that this program is expecting to have. But my third over here, my third over here, they don't fit that script. So I'm going to teach them in a different way in a small group lesson, or I'm going to use this part of the script for this set of students and this part of the script for this set of students. But eventually they're all going to try journal page 55 because I want to see if they understand the concept that I'm supposed to be teaching that day, or I'm supposed to be teaching in line with the program that we're using. So for teachers, and I think the scripted program exists much more K to 6, for teachers struggling with that, I would highly encourage you, when you have the confidence and understanding in the program, to challenge administrators of what was the research-based reason we chose this program, so that you can maintain that. You can say, okay, my district spent a lot of money. They believe in these principles of this program. I am going to, as a professional working in this district, I'm going to maintain those because that's my job as a professional. Even if I don't agree, this is the reason that we're using that. But I'm going to personalize this in every other way possible to fit the needs of my students and make learning more engaging. So I want to be really cognizant of our time and jump into our exit ticket. But Matt, any reactions to that?
Well, and I say this, we have a back channel, and my exact comment is I love being self-deprecating, and I hear what you're saying. I understand what you're coming from, and there are components where I jump with 2 feet into this as well. There is some skepticism that I have that I'm sure I'm not alone in, because there's so much standardization, and I have the benefit of working with one other member in my grade level, which makes me feel like I have the right to have interpretation between the two of us and a big voice. I couldn't imagine, Ken, in your shoes or in a larger district when you have 4, 5, 6 teachers that are trying to be relatively aligned, or if it gets larger than that, that's easier. Hey, 9 teachers are doing this one way. I'm just going to do it my way and hope no one's watching. I guess all of that to say, I think going back to my previous compliment, and that's part of the reason why I ask it, Jason, is it comes down to knowing what's right for kids, but giving ourselves the permission to head in the direction that you mentioned. And that permission is something that we all struggle with substantially as educators, even though we know what's right, even though we know our kids. I think there is so much where I could just flash back to even switching grade levels and feeling like I'm responsible for brand new kids at a brand new grade level that I'm not familiar with. Am I an authority to say that I know the content and I know, yes, I am. There is some permission. There is some allowance that comes into that. So I appreciate both of your perspectives. I think what you've contributed, both of you, has been helpful. And I think that's the trend of where we're heading as educators, whether we want to or not. This may be something that should be deleted from the podcast. I think one of the great things for education might be a teacher shortage. And I don't mean that for the stress of us, but Ken, you go to work and do things that you're passionate about. Jason, you go to work and you do things you're passionate about that don't feel like work. I go to work and I'm very rarely tired by doing the teaching. Yeah, it's exhausting, don't get me wrong. I'm so much more tired by the games and the red tape that I have to cross. And so, again, dangerous to say, putting power into the hands of the teachers that are remaining may not be the worst thing when we're looking for education reform.
So I do want to be, I could talk about this all night, but I want to be cognizant of our time and jump into our exit ticket, which is the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week, Jason. Question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Again, it goes back to relationships. That's the core of all we do. And so if there's anything uh, a teacher can do for your learner is man, just love your learners. And loving's different. You don't have to like them. I love my own personal kids, but I don't like them all the time. Uh, but love them, and that means I'm going to do my absolute best and make the best choices I can to ensure that you're taken care of. We need more I got you, kid, instead of gotcha moments with our kids. And so if there was anything a teacher can do is just, man, build those positive relationships. Let kids know that you are there for them and for their learning, above all else.
For the next one, feel free to repeat, or if you have something else, what is the best piece of advice you've received? Might have been from a colleague, a supervisor, or even a student.
Um, my students always, I run into them every now and then as adults, and you know, they give me that, oh, you're my favorite teacher, my favorite class, learned so much, and whatever else. And so, you know, um, the one thing they always came back with is, you know, you gave us something different, you know. And so if I was going to tell a teacher, convey that to other teachers is, find a way to be different, find a way to do something that gets these kids attention. Uh, after they know they care about you, you know, I mean, that you care about them, not just in words, but in deeds, design that learning, make that learning, pour yourself into it. And they will see that, and they will know that, hey, you're making this different, not just because you want to, because you care about me. And you care about this learning that I'm partaking in. And I appreciate you designing this for me.
Beautiful answer. So we've all talked about this plenty tonight, but we recognize the school year goes in waves. There are days, possibly weeks, that we struggle to survive. What's something that you would boil down and say every educator needs to hear to help power up through those moments of struggle?
Um, moving into the roles that I've been in, you've just got to realize that you can only do what you can do. And and I know we all realize this with the pandemic, but you know a lot of us live and breathe at the school and just give it all, and then we have nothing left for our folk, our loved ones at home. We gotta take care of ourselves first before we can take care of anybody else. And so, in those moments, this is a hard job. It is I, it is one of the hardest jobs, but it's also one of the most rewarding as well. And so, you've got to take time for yourself. And my wife is also in education, and we just come home and we have a rule: we don't talk about school. We tried, if it's absolutely possible, we don't talk about school. If there's something funny that happened, or if there's some kind of thing we need to get off our chest that we can't do anything else, can't get off our chest with anybody else, you know, related to school, then we have those moments. But other than that, our time is our time. And that's what we got to carve out for our teachers and for ourselves is that time to just recharge, reboot, so we can come back better for our kids the next day.
Absolutely. I'm really interested to hear this answer. It's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What separates teachers who are the ones constantly seeking to change, innovate, and apply new teaching strategies?
I can innovate and change and do all this in the name of innovating and changing, and that's just as detrimental to learning as doing the same old rote compliance and um, you know content kind of learning. So my thing is, and in my book, I have a framework spelled out. Basically what a typical lesson could look like, with all the things built into it, with effect sizes labeled and whatever else. And so, some people are like, well, that's taking away my autonomy and my creativity, and I can't innovate or anything else. And then in my mind, I'm like, okay, so, I think about sports sometimes. Michael Jordan had a court he had to operate on, and he had rules he had to follow within inside a basketball game. But he's one of the greatest because he did it his way. I think about great artists like Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo, or Van Gogh. They have a canvas. That's their borders, but it didn't limit their creativity. And so having some kind of framework that we commit to and say, here's our design framework that we're going to commit to in every single lesson. These are the pieces we commit to having because we know it works and we see the evidence that it's working, and our kids know it just as well as we do. uh, you know that's the kind of innovation I like to see, is innovation with a purpose, innovation with intent, like Ken said earlier. Intentional innovation is what I'd like to see.
Beautiful. I will speak for myself as well as Ken, just say that this conversation has been great. And it seems like what you are imparting in education is really the right stuff. How can our audience continue to connect with you going forward? I know you mentioned a website, and we've talked about a book. So can you share details on both of those?
Sure. The website's www.letsquitteaching.com. Um, I post monthly, try bi-weekly, post on there. I put some podcasts. I'll be putting y'all's link to this podcast once it is published on there as well. There's my Twitter feeds on there. My Twitter handle is at Let's Quit Teaching, no G. Find things on there, but I try to put out some, resources and some tools for teachers to use. I also throw some of my same kind of posts over to Teachers on Fire magazine on Medium, just to get them published there and seen as well. But the book will be ready to ship May 6th, I believe. It's available for pre-order on Amazon right now. Let's stop teaching and start designing learning. The publisher said, well, let's get away from the quit thing since we have a teacher shortage going on. So let's talk about, let's change it to let's stop teaching and start designing learning. So I said, okay, I'll give you that one. So that's you can pre-order on Amazon, but if you wait around, I think this time next week you can pre-order on Routledge, and I will actually put they gave me a 20% discount flyer from the publisher, so I'll put that code up on my website as well if anybody's interested in that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We will link up to all of that. So if you're listening, scroll down. If you're watching on YouTube, scroll down. All of those links will exist there, as well as going to our show notes page, which can be found along with every other show that we've had, powereduup.com. And you can find the show notes here. I'll link up your website, your social media handle, as well as your book. Jason, thank you so much for your time tonight. I enjoyed this conversation as much as I thought I would. I think that you're conveying clear messages. Like Matt said, you are putting things that are typically very theory based, and you're making them very practical for teachers to take away and apply to their classroom. So I very much appreciate that, and what you're doing to have a positive influence on teaching and more importantly, learning in our classrooms. So thank you again. And Matt, why don't you take us on out of here?
So as we power down this episode, Jason, you have left us feeling powered up. Thank you so much. Everyone stay well, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.